The galaxy was a tapestry of stars, each thread woven with the lives of countless species, cultures, and histories. Among them, the Xylothians stood out, a diminutive race of ethereal beauty, their delicate forms shimmering with bioluminescent patterns that shifted with their emotions. They were a peaceful people, revered for their wisdom and artistry, but their traditions were as rigid as the crystalline spires of their homeworld. For Princess Larina, the youngest daughter of the Xylothian monarch, these traditions had become a gilded cage. Her fate, like that of her ancestors, was bound by the ancient custom of arranged marriages, a practice designed to forge alliances and preserve their bloodline. Yet, as she stood on the observation deck of her sleek, silver starship, gazing at the swirling nebulae beyond, she felt anything but revered. She felt small, insignificant, rejected. Larina's journey had begun with hope. At just 3 feet tall, her presence was unassuming, but her spirit burned brightly. Her bioluminescent markings glowed a soft blue, reflecting her determination as she set out to find a mate among the galaxy's eligible males. Her first stop had been the Varaxians, a warrior race known for their strength and honor. She had been greeted with pomp and ceremony, their towering, armored forms casting long shadows over her. But when the Varaxian prince saw her, his laughter echoed through the grand hall. "You are too fragile," he had said, his voice dripping with disdain. "A Varaxian mate must be strong, not a delicate flower that withers under the slightest pressure." Larina had left without a word, her markings flickering with humiliation. Next, she traveled to the Quarians, a species of scholars and philosophers. Their leader, a serene being with eyes like molten gold, had listened intently as she spoke of her hopes and dreams. But in the end, he too had rejected her. "Your species is too emotional," he had said, his tone gentle but firm. "We seek logic and reason in a mate, not the turbulence of feelings." Larina's heart had ached as she departed, her markings dimming to a somber gray. The pattern repeated itself across a dozen worlds. The Krillians found her too small, the Zephyrians too quiet, the Thalorians too alien. Each rejection chipped away at her confidence, leaving her feeling more isolated than ever. Her markings, once vibrant and full of life, now pulsed erratically, a visual representation of her inner turmoil. She began to wonder if there was something inherently wrong with her, if she was destined to be alone. It was during her lowest moment that her ship's navigation system malfunctioned, sending her hurtling toward an uncharted sector of the galaxy. Alarms blared as the vessel shuddered, its engines straining against the gravitational pull of a nearby star. Larina's hands flew across the control panel, her movements frantic but precise. She managed to stabilize the ship, but not before it was drawn into the atmosphere of a small, blue-green planet. The last thing she saw before losing consciousness was a vast expanse of water and land, dotted with strange, angular structures. When she awoke, she was lying on a soft surface, surrounded by unfamiliar scents and sounds. Her head throbbed, and her markings flickered weakly. She blinked, trying to make sense of her surroundings. The room was simple but cozy, with walls made of a material she couldn't identify. Sunlight streamed through a transparent panel, casting warm rays across the floor. Before she could gather her thoughts, a figure entered the room. He was tall, much taller than any Xylothian, with broad shoulders and a kind face. His eyes, a deep shade of brown, widened in surprise as he saw her. "You're awake," he said, his voice warm and reassuring. "I found your ship crashed in the field behind my house. You're lucky I was out there." He spoke in a language she didn't understand, but the universal translator embedded in her ear quickly converted his words into her native tongue. Larina sat up slowly, her markings shifting to a cautious yellow. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Earth," he replied, smiling. "I'm Jack. And you are?" "Larina," she said, hesitating for a moment before adding, "Princess Larina of Xyloth." Jack's eyebrows shot up. "A princess, huh? Well, that explains the fancy ship." He chuckled, the sound rich and genuine. "You're safe here, Larina. I'll do whatever I can to help you." As the days passed, Lorena found herself drawn to Jack in ways she couldn't explain. He was unlike any being she had ever met, kind, patient, and endlessly curious. He asked her questions about her world, her people, and her journey, listening intently as she spoke. In turn, he shared stories of Earth, its history, and its diverse cultures. She marveled at the resilience of humans, their ability to thrive despite their flaws. Jack's openness was a stark contrast to the rigid expectations of the alien males she had encountered, and for the first time in a long while, she felt seen, valued. But as their bond deepened, Lorena couldn't shake the weight of her duty. Her people would be expecting her return, and she knew she couldn't stay on Earth forever. One evening, as they sat beneath the stars, she turned to Jack, her markings glowing a soft, melancholic purple. "I have to go back," she said, her voice trembling. "My people, they need me." Jack nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand," he said, "but you don't have to face them alone. If you'll let me, I'll come with you." Lorena's heart swelled with gratitude and something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. She reached out, her small hand resting on his. "Thank you," she whispered. As they prepared to leave Earth, Lorena couldn't help but wonder what awaited them. The galaxy had rejected her time and time again, but in Jack, she had found something she hadn't known she was searching for. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, and perhaps, in doing so, they would change the course of her people's history. For now, though, she allowed herself a moment of peace, her markings glowing a steady, contented blue as she looked toward the stars. Jack had always considered himself an ordinary man. He lived in a modest farmhouse on the outskirts of a small town, far removed from the bustling cities and their towering skyscrapers. His days were filled with the simple routines of tending to his crops, repairing his equipment, and occasionally venturing into town for supplies. He had never imagined that his life would intersect with the stars, let alone with a being as extraordinary as Lorena. Yet, as he stood beside her in the dimly lit barn where her ship was being repaired, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. She was unlike anyone or anything he had ever encountered. Her delicate frame shimmered with an otherworldly glow, and her eyes, large and luminous, seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. But it wasn't her appearance that captivated him. It was her spirit. Despite the weight of her responsibilities and the pain of her past rejections, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that commanded respect. The days following Lorena's arrival had been a whirlwind of activity. Jack had enlisted the help of a few trusted friends, engineers and mechanics who were more than a little skeptical about the origins of the strange silver vessel. He had spun a convincing story about it being an experimental aircraft, and while they raised their eyebrows, they didn't ask too many questions. Together, they worked tirelessly to repair the ship, their efforts fueled by a mix of curiosity and determination. Lorena, for her part, proved to be an invaluable asset. Her knowledge of advanced technology far surpassed anything they had ever seen, and she guided them with a patience and precision that left them in awe. As the repairs progressed, Jack and Lorena spent more time together, their conversations ranging from the mundane to the profound. She told him about her homeworld, a place of crystalline forests and shimmering oceans, where the air was filled with the soft hum of bioluminescent creatures. He, in turn, shared stories of Earth, its triumphs and tragedies, its beauty and chaos. They spoke of their dreams and fears, their hopes and regrets. With each passing day, Jack found himself drawn deeper into her world, his initial curiosity giving way to something far more profound. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Lorena turned to him, her markings glowing a soft, contemplative blue. "Why are you helping me, Jack?" she asked, her voice tinged with a vulnerability that tugged at his heart. He hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because you deserve it," he said finally. "You've been through so much, and yet you haven't given up. That takes a kind of strength most people can't even imagine. If I can help make your journey a little easier, then I will." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. "You are different from the others," she said softly. "They saw only my size, my fragility. But you see me. Jack felt a lump form in his throat. I see you, he said simply. And I think you're incredible. The moment hung between them, charged with an unspoken understanding. For the first time in her life, Lorena felt truly seen. Not as a princess or a pawn in a political game, but as herself. It was a feeling she had never known, and it filled her with a warmth that spread through her entire being. But as much as she wanted to stay in this moment, the reality of her situation loomed large. Her people were waiting and her duty called. The ship was nearly ready, and soon they would have to leave Earth behind. The thought filled her with a bittersweet ache. She had found something precious here, something she wasn't sure she could bear to lose. The day of their departure arrived sooner than either of them expected. The ship, now fully repaired, stood gleaming in the early morning light. Jack's friends had left the night before, their work complete, leaving him and Lorena alone to say their goodbyes. She stood at the edge of the field, her markings flickering with a mix of emotions: hope, fear, gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite name. Are you sure about this? Jack asked, his voice tinged with concern. Going back. It won't be easy. Lorena nodded, her resolve firm. I have to face them, she said. But I don't have to do it alone. Not anymore. Jack smiled, a warmth spreading through his chest. Then let's go. They boarded the ship together, the interior humming with life as the systems came online. Lorena took her place at the helm, her hands moving deftly over the controls. Jack watched in awe as the ship lifted off the ground, the world below shrinking until it was nothing more than a speck of blue and green. The stars stretched out before them, infinite and uncharted, a reminder of the vastness of the galaxy and the challenges that lay ahead. As they traveled through the void, Lorena found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She had set out to find a mate, to fulfill a duty imposed upon her by tradition. But somewhere along the way, she had found something far more valuable. A connection that transcended species and cultures, a bond forged not by obligation but by choice. She glanced at Jack, his presence a steady anchor in the uncertainty of space. He had shown her a side of humanity that she had never known, a side defined not by strength or logic, but by compassion and resilience. When they finally arrived at Xyloth, the sight of her homeworld filled her with a mix of emotions. The crystalline spires rose majestically from the surface, their light refracting in a dazzling display of colors. But beneath the beauty lay a society bound by tradition, a society that had rejected her time and time again. She took a deep breath, her markings glowing a determined blue. This time, she would face them not as a princess seeking approval, but as a woman who had found her own worth. As the ship descended, Jack reached out and took her hand. Whatever happens, he said, his voice steady, we'll face it together. Lorena squeezed his hand, a sense of calm settling over her. For the first time in her life, she felt ready, not just to fulfill her duty, but to challenge the very traditions that had defined her existence. Together, they stepped out of the ship and into the unknown, their bond a beacon of hope in a galaxy that had once seemed so cold and unyielding. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time, Lorena felt truly prepared to face them. And as they walked toward the crystalline spires, she knew that whatever the future held, she would not face it alone. The crystalline spires of Xyloth loomed before them, their iridescent surfaces catching the light of the twin suns and scattering it into a kaleidoscope of colors. Lorena felt a familiar ache in her chest as she stepped onto the polished pathway leading to the grand hall. This was her home, yet it had never truly felt like one. The air was thick with the scent of luminescent flora, a fragrance that once brought her comfort, but now only served as a reminder of the expectations that had weighed her down. She glanced at Jack, who walked beside her, his presence a steadying force. His expression was calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes scanned their surroundings with a mix of curiosity and caution. He was out of his element here, a human in a world of aliens, yet he had come without hesitation. For her, the grand hall was as imposing as she remembered, its towering arches and shimmering walls designed to inspire awe. Inside, the council awaited, their bioluminescent markings glowing in solemn patterns. At the center stood her father, King Xyler, his presence commanding and his expression unreadable. His markings, a deep, regal purple, flickered faintly as he regarded her. "Lyrina," he said, his voice resonating through the hall. "You have returned." She stepped forward, her head held high despite the tremor in her heart. "I have, father, and I bring with me a companion, Jack of Earth." The council murmured, their markings shifting to hues of curiosity and skepticism. One of the elders, a wizened Xylothian with markings that glowed a stern orange, stepped forward. "A human?" he said, his tone laced with disdain. "What could a primitive species offer to a princess of Xyloth?" Lyrina felt a surge of anger, but before she could respond, Jack spoke. "With all due respect," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I may not have the strength or technology of your people, but I offer something far more valuable: loyalty, compassion, and a willingness to stand by Lyrina's side no matter what." The elder's markings flickered, but before he could retort, King Xyler raised a hand, silencing the room. "Enough," he said. "Lyrina, you have defied tradition by bringing an outsider here. If you wish to prove his worth, he must undergo the trial of compatibility." The trial of compatibility was an ancient ritual designed to test the mettle of potential mates. It was a series of challenges that assessed not only physical and mental prowess but also the strength of the bond between the individuals. Lyrina had heard stories of those who had failed, stories that ended in heartbreak and exile. She turned to Jack, her markings glowing a worried yellow. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "It's dangerous." Jack met her gaze, his eyes steady. "I'm not leaving you," he said. "Not now. Not ever." The first challenge was a test of endurance. Jack was led to a chamber filled with swirling, luminescent mist that sapped energy and clouded the mind. He was to navigate the maze-like room and retrieve a crystal orb, all while resisting the mist's effects. Lyrina watched from the observation deck, her markings flickering with anxiety as Jack stumbled through the haze. He moved slowly, his steps deliberate, his breathing labored. But he didn't give up. He pressed on, his determination unwavering, until he finally emerged, the orb clutched in his hand. The council's markings shifted to hues of surprise and grudging respect. The second challenge was a test of intellect. Jack was presented with a series of complex puzzles, each designed to push the limits of his cognitive abilities. Lyrina's heart raced as she watched him work, his brow furrowed in concentration. He approached each puzzle methodically, his human ingenuity shining through as he found solutions that even the council hadn't anticipated. When he solved the final puzzle, the room fell silent, the council's markings glowing with a mix of awe and disbelief. The final challenge was the most daunting, a test of the bond between Jack and Lyrina. They were placed in a chamber where they faced their deepest fears, manifested as illusions. Lyrina found herself surrounded by the faces of those who had rejected her, their voices echoing with scorn. She felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on her, threatening to crush her spirit. But then she felt Jack's hand in hers, his presence a grounding force. "You're not alone," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You never have been." Together, they faced the illusions, their bond growing stronger with each step. When they emerged from the chamber, the council was silent, their markings glowing in a spectrum of emotions. King Xyler stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You have proven yourselves," he said, his voice carrying a note of something Lyrina had never heard before: pride. "The bond between you is undeniable." Lyrina felt a surge of relief, her markings glowing a radiant blue. But before she could speak, the elder who had questioned Jack earlier stepped forward. "This changes nothing," he said, his markings flickering with defiance. "A human cannot be the mate of a Xylothian princess. It is against tradition." Lyrina's markings flared with anger, but Jack placed a hand on her shoulder, calming her. "Tradition is important," he said, his voice steady. But it shouldn't come at the cost of happiness. Lorena deserves to choose her own path, just as your people deserve to evolve beyond the constraints of the past. The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. King Xyler regarded Jack for a long moment, his markings shifting to a contemplative hue. Then, to everyone's surprise, he nodded. "Perhaps it is time for change," he said. "Lorena, you have shown courage and resilience. If this is your choice, then you have my blessing." The council erupted in murmurs, their markings flickering with a mix of shock and acceptance. Lorena felt tears welling in her eyes as she turned to Jack. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. Always, as they left the grand hall, the crystalline spires bathed in the light of the setting suns, Lorena felt a sense of peace she had never known. She had faced the galaxy and its expectations, and in doing so, she had found not only her own worth but also a love that transcended species and traditions. Together, she and Jack would forge a new path, one defined not by duty, but by choice. And as they walked hand in hand into the future, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together.